us right from the start. He knows the scheme. He's our head trainer. I don't know how many courses you've done. I've lost track now, Ian, but you've been all over the world with it. And he's always worth listening to, so I'm delighted he's here to talk to you again today. So let me just give you that. Try not to put it in your, yeah, see, that's good. They'll let us know. Fantastic.
Okay, I'm wired for sound. You all hear me? Oh. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, that's first question passed. Well done. Okay. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed lunch. If any of you are feeling a little bit drowsy, I'll try and keep you awake for the next few minutes there. Pui, do we have to tell you when to change, or are we? Ah, okay. Okay. What I'm going to present to you today is based on the supplement which is on jack-up vessels. From the last few conferences that have been held, normally someone has done a presentation bespokely made to the supplement. So you did one on DP a couple of years ago. Peter, I think, has also done one on DP as well. I think Sujit did one on heavy lift at the very first conference. So jack-ups was something which I know a little bit about, and is only a little bit. I know there's some experts in the room, one of them who works for us, so any questions will be directed to him. So my first question is, how many people have got jack-up accreditation in the room? Please show your hands. Okay, and how many people have inspected a jack-up? Okay, is that the same? No. Okay, make those notes of those, won't you? And those of you who have got jack-up accreditation, you've just got the next 5 years, so that's okay. Right, so what is a jack-up? My involvement realistically in jack-ups is predominantly from the renewable sector. I've worked very close to jack-ups in the oil and gas sector when I was at sea myself, but never been on one. So the first jack-ups that I really worked on were in the renewable sector. We've got a colleague from the US there. He might recognize we've got something like that, lift boat, basically designed for the US Gulf. That was actually in the Thames on Gunfleet Sands, which was one of the very early wind farm projects. Anybody want to hazard a guess at what looks a little bit odd with that picture? It's got 3 legs. Yeah, Hillary can count. Well done. That's okay. Anything else? Okay, in the event of an emergency, how do we get off it? Slide down the pole, yeah, possibly. That's one way. Okay, this one was chartered by 2 significant players in the renewable industry. I will not mention who they are, but anybody who knows who owns Gunfleet Sands can soon do a cross-check and see. But this was the start of the industry, and it was a case of realistically working with what was available. I won't dwell on this too much, but we got brought in because a company had concerns, serious safety concerns, about this particular vessel. And this is no joke. We went on board, and I'll raise about evacuation because actually is one of the questions which is in the supplement. And it was, okay, when you jacked, and when we jacked there, we were jacked with a 60-meter air gap, because we had to jack to 60 meters air gap. And ironically, on certain locations on Gunfleet Sands, you could look down over the side and see the foot, because it dried out on some of the drying locations. So you were literally completely jacked. So they had to get to that height to be able to lift the nacelle, which is a big gearbox as it was then. Today we have direct drives, but same thing, it's a nacelle, to put it on and to be able to mount the blades. So that was a necessity. So I asked a simple question, okay, when you jack to 60 meters, how do we get off in the event of it? And they said, oh, we use a pilot ladder. Okay, so I went over to where the life rafts were, and there's a pilot ladder, and there's a sign on it saying, in the event of an evacuation, this is not made up, I'm not talking total crap as most people think I do. there's a sign on it saying, in the event of an evacuation, get the other pilot ladder. So the other pilot ladder was on the opposite side of the vessel, on the opposite side to the life rafts, where you had to tie two together and then descend on a 60-meter thing. Well, anybody who's ever climbed up a rope ladder of any height, once you get to a certain point, it dips in and literally comes horizontal. So we suggested to the vessel operator that they try this, which they promptly refused for good reason, and we wouldn't have let them anyway. But yeah, so that was one of the questions which came up. And I have to say, unfortunately, we didn't get an answer. The entire project was built based on what we did do was buy 2 extra pilot ladders, so you didn't have to go and tie 2 together. They were already pre-tied. But that was a situation what the renewable sector was in its early stages. And I think some of the images what Graham put up earlier, you can reminisce to that, Graham, going back to your sailing days on the Cutty Sark. And I can insult him now, he doesn't work for Scottish Power anymore. So that was the cutting edge of it. Today we've improved dramatically and we have some very much state-of-the-art vessels. And it's an industry which is growing. The improvements of safety have been really quite amazing. So, and it was needed because in the early days it was quite poor. So the kind of vessels which I mainly do, or certainly our business mainly does, are more this type, which is your self-propelled jack-up vessel, heavy lift vessel as well, if you want to deem it that way. And from an inspection point of view, I still quite like doing them. I recently did one called the Seajax Zaratan, which is this vessel here, which is now down in Taiwan. Was that the Zaratan or the Scylla? Sorry, it might be the Scylla, that one. Apologies. One called the Zaratan, which is a sister ship of this one, slightly smaller. That one now is down in Taiwan, doing the first Taiwanese offshore wind farm. And what you get when you do one of those, you're doing a DP vessel, you're doing a jack-up vessel, you're doing a vessel with a helipad. Aspects of accommodation also come into it as well. So in terms of covering supplements of things, they're very useful to do. Same as doing a DP vessel with helideck and various other aspects on it, even heavy lift on board as well. Okay, so the supplement's designed realistically for all of these, but it also covers drilling rigs as well. As I said, I've never done a drilling rig with it, or a towed dumb barge. So it doesn't have to be propelled. It can also be a towed vessel, towed barge as well. So all these are encompassed within this supplement. Okay. So the way the presentation is laid out, the supplement question is asked at the top. And then what we're doing is basically giving a range of answers and a range of questions that you may or may not ask or think about when you're doing a vessel. So for those of you who've never done a jack-up vessel and might have aspirations of wanting to get into that market through supervision and increasing your capabilities, this might be useful. For those of you who've got accreditation, you'll probably tell me I'm wrong at the end, but okay. Right, okay, so first question, and they are laid out in the same order as what there is in the supplement, so yeah, off we go. So is a vessel operating within a specific trading area or limiting distance from a safe haven as prescribed by the flag state? So what are we looking for there? In essence, we're looking at certification. Okay, it's realistically, it's a fairly standard question. One question about, which I'm going to throw out to you is, what is a CMED or an MISW? What type of inspection is it? It's an audit. Yeah, it's an IMCA, yeah. It's a snapshot. Safety. You're all right in one way, but you're all wrong in another. Is it a pre-hire? Is it suitability? Could that question be deemed as a type of suitability question? Yep, it could. And there's quite a number of the questions which are in this supplement, when you look at them, actually form parts of actually suitability, particularly when we start talking about ground conditions at a later stage, because they are site specific and they can be specific as to what type of foot, what type of arrangement the jack-up has as well, and also the limiting conditions there as well. So we're looking at certification for it. Again, is there any restrictions? And because IMCA is an international document, we're not just focused on renewables, although renewables is now global. So the US was really one of the homes of the original jackup vessels. US Gulf and then latterly into Persian Gulf, that's where they really came from. Then we migrated into the North Sea and other parts of Europe and things like that. Okay, so the US has had lift boats for a very long time, like the three-legged one and then four-legged ones as such there. Some had propulsion, some were towed. A lot of them had restrictions, and that was US Gulf only. Some of them were fitted with anybody who's worked in the US, tonnage doors. I'll probably get corrected by our colleague here on how the tonnage doors works. I was perplexed when I first went over there. Went on what I thought was a 3,500 ton supply vessel to find out it was 99 tons, and it was crewed by half of the criminal population of the US Gulf. But they had the orange overalls, and they got brought in a special taxi and turned back home in a special taxi at the end of the trip. That's not a joke, either. It's true. So where can the thing work? Most of the big vessels today have got pretty much unlimited, but you are doing a range of different types of vessels. It can be different types of surveys, what the vessel can be doing, from boreholes to core sampling to installing foundations, wind turbines, substations, substation jackets, working on oil and gas alongside a platform where they're doing remedial works. There's any range of things. So the vessel may be used as a heavy lift, it may be used as an accommodation unit, it may be used as a support unit. So there's ranges of things, and then maybe issues of where the vessel can work. Certainly in the certification, there will be aspects on manning. That comes into the next question, which is really strictly about a MODU. So, MODU, okay? Can a vessel be two different types of entity? Simple answer is with a jackup vessel, yes it can. Because most jackup vessels will have a vessel certificate to say that it is a, if I use an example of say the Sea-Jack Zaratan, Scylla, any of the self-propelled, they will be a standard vessel. But then they can also be a MODU. So when they change from being a vessel to a MODU, do they need a vessel master? Technically, on some of the vessels, no, they don't. They can actually de-man down to something like a crew of about 4 under the minimum safe manning, as opposed to when they drop back into the water, they may need a crew of 20. So again, it's when is a vessel not a vessel? And that's realistically, when is it a MODU, when is it not a MODU? But again, the question is asking, does the vessel have a MODU certificate? So again, it's a simple yes or no. But what you're looking at is the criteria behind it, and is there anything there that needs to be addressed, needs to be picked up on? Have a good look at the certificate. Again, looking at any restrictions that it might have. There will be listings of restrictions which reflect on safety, and that can come back to, again, what its survival heights are. Survival heights can be determined depending on different sea areas, different projects. I know I've got a couple of marine warranty surveyors in the room here. So if I'm correct, Lisa, 50-year storm cycle is a normal one used, but you can go up to, I think the biggest I've ever seen is something like 1,000-year storm cycle on some form of modeling. But in essence, most are assessed on a 50-year storm cycle, and that is to give an escape value. So if the jackup has to jack to say 20 meters, then any sea running through that area should pass underneath it without hitting the underside of the jackup rig. And that's what it's based on. So to work that one out, you need to have enough leg length. Pointless going to work in 40 meters of water when you've got 40 meters of leg, because you might have penetration, that's when it goes into the ground, of course, of 45 meters. So you can't physically work in that location. So Lisa would come along and say, no, we're not giving you a COA for this because you've not got long enough legs. Might be some of us in this room.
Does the MODU code address walking?
Oh, a walking vessel?
No. Those jackups, the tri-legs,
Yeah.
have a tendency during certain sea conditions, literally to walk away from or into whatever the work is. What's that? Okay.
Yeah, it's a sliding, skidding motion. Yeah, on the one which we saw, the three-legged one, we had an incident of that during the build in bad weather, and that slid slightly. We weren't talking much, we were talking a matter of meters, but it still moved. It wasn't particularly noticeable when it happened. But just the thing when you said about walking, there is actually something called a wave walker, which is a jack-up, which actually physically walks. I thought you were going to ask me something about them, which I know absolutely nothing about. So I wasn't going to be able to answer that one. But what the MODU does, it's effectively, it's another certificate check. So you all know how to check a certificate. Fortunately, the main list of certificates has been removed from the CMID, which has saved us all about 3 hours on an inspection and a lot of pain and suffering of asking for more and more information. So this is a single one-off certificate check. Okay, same thing. Is it valid? Yes, Ursula.
Just find out one thing. I'm wondering if you no longer have to do the list of certificates, how can you hand on heart answer the question of the certificates in order on board if you haven't checked?
Basically, on that one, all I've done is looked at the certificate file. So I'll ask for the certificate file. Is there an order, running order in there? The question also relates to, are there any conditions of class, or is there any memorandum which relating to safety related items on board? So I will look at that certificate anyway, and basically you will look through to see, mine is a spot check. Is there an annex of sorry, a listing of certification? Is it there? But we're not requested to check it anymore. It's the vessel, it's the owner's responsibility or operator's responsibility to maintain that. But yeah, it's been removed. I think there was, I don't know, something probably should have asked Mark, and maybe Hillary can answer that at a later stage, or Mike. There was at one point discussion of removing crew lists from this as well, and that was partly to do with GDPR rules and things as well. But where that actually sits at the present moment in time, I'm not sure.
I trust that the certificate index is totally removed by putting in dates and not by checking the certificate.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if we leave it till the end, that'll be. I know I'm really engaging and everything, but it's you know. Okay. So yeah. So question 2, basically, it's a certificate check. So we're all good at checking certificates, although the bulk of them have been removed now from that. But it is looking for restrictions which are within the certification. Okay, question 3. Most of us should be able to answer. It's a very simple one. Are the legs marked with draft marks, basically? Yes. This was a freshly painted. This is the top of a jack-up, so it's very clear. What tends to happen is the more the jack-ups are used, the paint wears off, the markers wear off. What the jack-ups have, certainly the modern ones, they have a remote counter which is in the jack house, mainly in the bridge of the vessel, and that's monitoring it automatically. But you still need to see what the draft markers are, because there are checks which have to be done for calibration. So again, it's a simple thing. Same as when you're checking the draft marks on a ship. Can you see the marks visibly? If it's yes, nothing to add apart from a comment about them. If it's no, then it's an observation there because you physically can't see them. And that's a case of if you can see what you can see and you report what you see, that's the fact. Take a photograph of it if the markings are one. If it's just one on one leg, it doesn't matter. It still becomes an observation to it because as one of the legs isn't marked, so for calibration purposes, it needs to be identified. So yeah, simple thing, it's there. The other thing as well with jackets which have particularly long legs, you're also looking for aviation lights as well. That can come into the additional supplement section. If one, and you ask them to put the aviation lights on, there's one not working, that would be something you would put into point 14 of this supplement, which would be an additional finding to it. Okay, this is a bit of an odd question, and fortunately in our office, I have a very good guy who was master of a jack-up for 5 years, one of the big ones, and he always said when he was asked this question, it's slightly odd because it's more based around some of the older types of jackups to what they used to have with inclinometers things. So how the calibration certificates and that are done, it may be one that you come across if you were doing it that you get as an observation finding, and it has to be given more investigation by the vessel operator. Because what a lot of the vessels have, they have calibrated systems which are digitally calibrated within the actual jacking control components, rather than just on a actual inclinometer, which is in place on how that is calibrated. Because are they calibrated? They probably were at day one, but are they regularly calibrated? From his own experience, and I'd go with him on that, he said no. Basically, they've probably moved around the ship as well. So it's something that is not a kind of a trick question to it, because there are no trick questions within the CMID. It is one that you may not find a simple answer to. So it may be something that that does create an observation and then may be rejected by the vessel operator or master at a later stage because of how it's going to be explained. Next question, has or have jacking engineers received formal training in jackup operations, including fundamentals of jackups of soil conditions? Anybody being on a jacking engineers course? Nope. Anybody heard of a jacking engineers course? Yep. Okay. May I ask where the course was or who it was run by? Julian Osborne. Which company? Oh, that, okay. In-house course. Okay. Okay, because jackup courses, there are not many. LOC have run one kind of traditionally for quite some years, but there are not many because there are so many different jacking systems, and a lot of them may only be on one or two types of vessels. So it's actually a question that when it comes up, is really, have you had training on this specific system? And what level of training? And a lot of it may be in-house training, or it may be training from the actual jackup manufacturer, the systems manufacturer, and then it's how you interpret the soil conditions. Soil conditions should, there is one at Aberdeen, yeah. How good it is, I'll let you answer that one later. Okay. Yeah, the jackup training levels, what we've found historically have not been great, because a lot of people are literally self-taught within the vessel. So what a lot of the companies have started doing is doing a kind of CPD training, so that somebody will have had some level of experience when they've been brought onto the vessel, and then they will start to train people in-house. And in fairness, it's not a bad way of doing it, because what you've got to remember is a lot of these vessels, which particularly have come into the renewable sector, are new vessels. A lot of them are prototypes, and they weren't there before, so you just couldn't find the people with the experience unless they had come from jackup drilling rigs or some of the lift boats and things like that in the US Gulf, Persian Gulf and things. So quite a few issues around it. So it's what level of training have people had. A lot of vessels you will find the engineers, jacking engineers, others will be chief officers. And it's one of the core questions is, how many of them are there? Is it one per shift? Or is it two per shift? Or is there a floating guy or girl in between who has got experience? And it's also, what's the level of maintenance from the engineers in terms of what training have they had within using the jackup systems and how they maintain it as well. All these are core questions which come up into this part of it. And again, going back to the soil conditions, that's kind of asked a little bit later on, but it's how they interpret it. Because normally what would happen is a vessel will go onto a location, which will be a bespoke locations or set of locations, and you will know what level of penetration you will get on those locations. So you may get a meter's penetration, you may get 20 meters penetration. Because what they're doing is basically having to force down. If any of you don't know how a jackup works, it's basically using force into ground until it's stable or it stops. Some of the older ones, like the 3-legger, which you saw there, that had big feet, massive square feet. I think they were 10 meters by 10 meters, something like that. Basically big pads, and they would preload. So what they would do is they would take on ballast, around about 4,000 ton of ballast, and then jack up to about 1 meter above sea level and sit there and basically see how the legs went, if they started to sink, and then you just put a bit more pressure down on it there. But it wasn't jacking on pressure, it was jacking on ballast. The modern vessels, they jack with hydraulic pressure. So they'll probably put up to what, 14,000 ton on a leg, I think it is, something like that. The big ones can do. So they will just push and push and push. And you will get odd ones where, you know, one leg will have 5-6 meters penetration, another one might have 8-9 meters, another one might have 2-3. Depends how many legs they've got, but it can vary. But they will all push till they get to a certain level. It might be stated by the COA type of thing Lisa would issue of what the criteria is. So there's a combination of things. And again, that is something which, if you were doing a standard vessel, you're asking about a bespoke set of soil conditions here for a bespoke location. So again, that is something which is kind of a crossover from being a standard vessel inspection to actually an inspection of something where it's going to. And that was a question which I had on the last vessel I did, which is now in Taiwan, because we'd been asked again by the client to identify if they had certain emergency procedures and things in place for that bespoke area. But you're still doing a CMID, which is not a pre-hire or a suitability inspection, but some of it does cross over, particularly in this section, and that's realistically why I'm highlighting it there. Okay, so levels of training, ultimately we are looking for something, okay, and that is really a description of what levels it is, how many people have had it, the length of training, is there ongoing training, has there been a training program which has been written, various things. Is everybody getting quite hot in here? Have we got some windows open? I don't want people doing an Angela Merkel on us and starting shaking or anything like that. So. Just to show I'm current, that's all. If anybody didn't follow that, Angela Merkel nearly passed out yesterday because of dehydration in some event she was at. She was stood shaking, so I didn't want to see anybody starting to do that. Okay. So, next question. Does the vessel's operating manual cover generic procedures for refloating, towing, self-propulsion, dynamic positioning, preloading, elevated operations applicable to routine operations of a jackup? Right, big question. Okay, so procedures manual. That's what we're looking into. One, when you go and do an inspection, how many times have you been to do an inspection and you get upset, oh, these are the manuals, these are this, and you're given a big box of stuff and off you go and read it yourself. I don't need to know how it works because I'm not going to use it. What I want to know is, do they know, the crew, how it works? So when they give me that, I normally give them it back and say, I don't need to, you tell me. Then you can take the manual and reference back to see what they're telling you is what they're doing. So that's again, question, answer, listen to what they're telling you, cross-reference to what is written. That's what this question is basically all about. Understanding that the crew understand what the procedures are. And there's quite a range of things there. And for those of you who do DP, most of the modern vessels have DP, and what they go through is a changeover. So when you go from actually pinned, which is basically legs down on seabed, to floating. So you go through a bit of a stage when you're jacking down where it gets a little bit bumpy because hull is not out of the water and it's still having uplift effect from the water. And it's that stage which is quite critical, and that's very weather critical as well, because a lot of vessels can't operate much more than about 2 meters HS. And it's simply because if it starts bumping, you're picking something up, when it's fully loaded with say 6 turbines, whatever, might be 20-odd thousand tons. So to bounce 20,000 tons doesn't work very well. It will do some damage at some stage. So those crossovers, and I think Rolls-Royce have developed a different one. I think Kongsberg have developed them. Some of you may know of other ones where they go from a semi-DP to a jacking situation, and it's a reaction on the DP system which basically softens it so the DP isn't working against itself, because of course when DP has an interaction from a physical force, it throws itself out. So this moderates the interaction of the vessel, because orientation of the vessel for pinning it is critical, because when it's been pinned to position a wind turbine or a foundation or a substation or a jacket or whatever it's doing, it has a specific orientation that it's got into. So you've got your ghost on your DP, drive the vessel over the top of that, and it sits there and it has to basically land in that position with a tolerance of maybe ½ a meter at best. So weather does become an issue over that. And again, that goes through the preload side of it as well. So it's getting that information out of the crew, making sure that the crew understand what they're talking about. And it really is, it's a listening question. Again, cross-referencing to what has been documented. Okay, procedures. Does the jacking system manual cover safe operations and maintenance? Again, kind of a standard question for any vessel, but this is just bespoke to an actual jacking system. There was talk a few years ago when more vessels were coming out into the renewable market that they would start to do an FMEA on jacking systems. I think I saw one which had been put together in a kind of loose situation, but it's something that hasn't, or not I'm aware of, has really followed suit because of the criticality of it. Because in essence, the early jacking systems and vessels jack up rigs would probably only maybe jack once, twice a year, maybe 3 times at best. You've now got a vessel which is jacking probably 5, 6 times up and down a week. So the wear on the components becomes massively increased. As an example, when we were on the 3-legged thing, which was a real disaster, it resides somewhere in West Africa as far as I believe now. That one, when we looked at the planned maintenance system for it, there was one particular item which said, in 6 months, change it. And everything was time-based. Most of it was within a month, do something, or 2 months. But everything was time-based, and it was not usage-based. And that also really goes onto the cranes as well, because these are heavy lift cranes which are doing repetitive lifting. And they're lifting, you know, up to 1,000 ton several times a week, where the Saipem 7000 or Micropi 7000 or whatever 7000 it's called today, maybe in its early days in the oil and gas sector would have done 4 or 5 lifts a year, which was significantly planned lifts, big heavy lifts, probably 10,000 ton or less than that. But these are vessels which are doing repetitive lifts of 1,000 tons, 500 tons on a daily basis. So the planned maintenance system has to reflect that. So you start to look at times weight, times usage, times maintenance, and it becomes more time-based. And that's what we tend to look for when we're doing evaluations of PMSs, particularly. If it's something that says, look at it after 3 months or 6 months, well, how many times has it actually operated within that time? And so there's been a lot of rewriting of PMSs by the actual manufacturers because of how the usage has come up. And it's quite significant. And we've seen that particularly on cranes, which are called a wraparound leg crane. You see them on some of the images. The crane is built around a leg. There's certain levels of vibration comes in it, and there's certain levels of oscillation comes into that as well. So if you're installing in a high tidal area, the actual thing starts to shake. And when you're looking up at, when they're landing, say, a blade or in a cell, you look up at it and this thing is doing this. And it looks like the tower's moving. It isn't. It's the vessel what's moving because of the oscillation in it. And if something moves that much, and we've seen it up to about 1.5 meters, 2 meters, something will give at some stage. And that's why you see cracks starting to appear around the pedestals of the cranes. Sea Installer, Sea Challenger, Brave Tern, Bull Tern, just the name vessels, it's quite public knowledge, have all seen that. I found the first ones on the Sea Installer on WADS, actually. That you're on the WADS, what you, Graham? Yeah, and that had cracks around the base. Only small ones, but yeah, it was basically caused by that. So the PMSs are really intuitive to look into, and it's getting an understanding that the engineers really know what they're dealing with that. So again, it's looking at the planned maintenance system and how up to date it is, what types of questions it's asking, what level of critical spares are involved, because there are some very critical spares in terms of jacking. And again, what level of knowledge do the engineers have in working with these systems as well? So it's measuring against documentation, measuring against physical evidence, but it's also measuring against the individuals who are doing the job to guess what type of knowledge that they have. This one here, this is about our jackup design limits for each mode, limiting weather criteria for each mode clearly defined. Kind of going back a little bit to where we showed you the three-legger. This is a survival drawing, so it's showing, as you can see there, that's the life raft being lowered, davit lowered. These are basically escape ladders, slightly better than the pilot ladder. They've just got like a zigzag ladder which they drop down, quite stable, quite good. And that's showing it's in its basically survival condition, and in the event of something going wrong, how things are deployed there. That's what the drawing is to do. But again, that's going back to what we said earlier, is the vessel kind of fit for purpose? Because it's depending, to answer that question correctly, you actually need to know where it's going to go to work, what the water depth is, what the level of penetration is, because otherwise it's quite a difficult question to answer. So one thing is, what is the criteria? Maybe 20 meters jack height, 22. I think the biggest I've seen is about 27 meters where it's had to be to work to a level. So again, these things all kick in. What's the jackable dead weight as well? So is there any restrictions if the vessel jacks and it's empty to what the motion is? Because there may be criteria that it can't actually stay jacked in a certain sea area because of vibration which may go through it. And also limitations on floating lifts. There's a range of different things there. When it goes slightly wrong, or very wrong, during loadouts of appropriate stability criteria being completed. The stability criteria, yeah, you come into two different areas because you go from a vessel on a lot of them to a static platform on others. So you've got different types of stability criteria which come in. And again, marine warranty always comes into a big part of this, to what criteria they're actually allowing. So there may be some cross-checking of that when you do this type of inspection. So one, you're looking at what the records are, historical records to see if there's been any issues raised in those. Are the records being completed? Who are they being completed by? What level of training have those people had? How competent are they? You know, we get asked the questions, competent person, you know, how many competent people are there? Still ask the question, what is a competent person? Because you get different definitions of it. If stability computers are being used, are they class approved stability computers, or is it somebody's Excel spreadsheet which they developed because they think it's Billy Whiz and it's great and amazing, but it hasn't been cross-checked with the actual stability book. So whatever they pump out might not be quite correct. I'm sure some of you have come across those before, or maybe even produced them. So, okay. So yeah, when it goes wrong, punch throughs. Anybody know what a punch through is? Nobody? Graham, you don't know what a punch through is? I can't believe that. Oh, right, okay then. I'm surprised Gert didn't tell us, but anyway. Okay. Basically what a punch through is if you've got 4 or 6 legs or 3 legs and you're going through to seabed and basically the leg keeps going. Okay, if it keeps going under a controlled environment, that's okay because you know there's something wrong and you can retract. It's when it actually punches through quickly and there's no chance of actually dealing with it. It just goes and the rig will tilt. The problem with modern jackups are very few of them can jack or move the legs when the vessel is inclined more than 5 degrees. Some of them are much less than that on the really big ones. It might be even half a degree or up to 2 degrees. So if you start to get one leg going through quite quickly, then it becomes a critical mass. But if it actually goes when weight is being deployed, say you've got something on the crane and a leg goes, then it can be absolutely catastrophic. And that's one of the big fears always with jackups that are used for installation, when they've got a wraparound leg crane and they've got maybe 1,500 tons on the hook, there is a significant weight around that particular leg and the actual forces which are reacting on it. So yeah, it's something that has to be very well calculated and has to be very well demonstrated. Okay, does the vessel have appropriate site data for a working location? Only issue I have with this question is this is absolutely site specific. So you're asking effectively where the vessel is going to go to work and have they got that level of data. This is an example of some data here. I think this is from the East Anglia 1 wind farm, totally confidential, but Graham doesn't work for me anymore, so he's not going to tell me off. It's not really, it's just something we pulled off the internet. Okay, so this is realistically what it looks like. This has been done through borehole sampling by experts who will take their core samples and will basically be able to evaluate how quickly a pile or leg will go into seabed. And that will give an interpretation to what level of penetration they're actually going to get. And that in a design stage may mean that the jackup has to have different feet attached to it. And that is basically in size. It might have a different sharper pin to the bottom, maybe different weights, different things around it like that. So the big question is, again, have they got the data? Can they interpret the data? Have they got enough leg length? Has there been any modifications to the foot? Does that affect the stability? All these things become to a conclusion. Okay, the little drawing there, that's just look at what a foot basically looks like, how it's shaped. And the other thing with that is, well, if you're in an area where it's quite soft and you get a lot of penetration, how do you get the leg out? Because if any of you, stick something in the ground and suction takes over, it's quite difficult to retract. So you're also then looking at what type of jetting systems there are to be able to water jet down, basically power wash down into the leg to relieve the suction, to solidify it, to be able to retract the leg as well. And sometimes there was one particular case on the Teesside wind farm, jackup was stuck there, I think it was for 29 days, 6 in my mind. And yeah, they couldn't retract. They ended up having to basically get like an airlifting system, which any of you who know diving, an airlift is a pipe, put it down and it basically blows out what's underneath it, so reverse hoover. And they had to do that around the legs to actually get enough release on the suction to be able to retrieve the leg. But there's a lot of jackups can spend considerable amounts of time actually physically stuck, and they're just constantly trying to pull to get release on it. And until you can get the release of that suction, you ain't going anywhere because it's got you. Does the vessel have a comprehensive lifting manual? In essence, this question is answered earlier on in the CMID in question 16, because it's the same things effectively. Does it have a lifting procedures manual? Yes, if it has it in 16, it certainly has it in this part here as well. Although this goes into it in a little bit more depth, okay, because you are now specifying on the big cranes, on the type of crane it is, whether it's a pedestal mounted crane on the deck or it's a wraparound leg crane, level of training, types of checks which are done. Again, all these things which you need to be looked at and investigated so you can evaluate the correct answer for it and deliberate whether there is a finding appropriate to it. Periodic inspections, that's a really big one because the usage of the physical cranes on these vessels is significant. They are always in use. So what level of inspection is done? Most of them will go through daily checks. And if they don't, you should be asking the question, why not? That's for sure. How are we doing for time, Mike? Am I? Okay, I don't know where I've got to go. I'm lost. All right, okay, I'll be quick. Does the vessel have personal transfer? Okay, personal transfer, there's various ways of doing it. Helicopters is an obvious one, fairly standard helideck procedures. It may have procedures around that and certain guidance that the vessel cannot have its crane up, or it has to have its crane in a different orientation to give the helicopter right to land. Boat landings, that's the one there. That's just a top view looking down of a standard boat landing, which I think Mike will talk a little bit more about with his crew vessels in a minute. Yeah, fairly standard. No different to actually pushing onto, in the offshore wind business, onto a wind turbine or transition piece jacket. Man riding, it's still done. Not much in the North Sea, but it's still done certainly in other parts of the world in different types of man baskets. I'm sure most of you have seen horror stories or things on YouTube where people are swinging about and then they get dipped in the water or they fall off and things. I've done a few of them, and I must admit, I don't particularly like them. We also have the frog. Anybody been in a frog? Yep. Yeah, it's quite interesting being in a frog. You're actually locked into it, and if it goes wrong, it's supposed to be safe. Okay. So different types of transfer systems. The main thing is, what's the procedures like? What's the standard of it? Do people know how to use it? What type of drills are done? Of course, when they've got helicopters, well, that's answered in your helicopter section as well. It's the same thing. The main one which you'll probably come across is going to be the boat transfers and how they're done. Emergency procedures, again, that's answered literally in the earlier parts of the document. However, what we're looking at here are the specific procedures around if something goes wrong with the jacking system, if it goes wrong when there's a lift on the hook, is there an emergency slew which can be manually operated, and that's quite difficult to do on the big cranes. And again, on the jacking systems, how that can basically stabilize that they could get the rig back to a level position or as level as possibly can be. And when it becomes a point where they have to start to evacuate personnel, all those are triggers in there which have to be bespokely referenced into it. If you look at the emerging markets which are coming up in the renewable sector, which Graham spoke about earlier, particularly in Taiwan, you've got a range of different things which have been kind of unique because jackups haven't been used down there before. Yes, they have in China, but not particularly just in close to that region. So you've got earthquake effects, you've got typhoon effects, and at the present moment in time, neither have been hit by one, so we don't exactly know what the result will be. We hope we know, because we hope enough due diligence has been done and modelling has been done to assess it, but you are still looking for that level of detail within the emergency response procedure. Very important. Last slide, more or less, just a little bit of reference reading if anybody's interested in jackups. There's a reference there to a DNV document, and there's also quite an interesting one which was produced by ABS, again bespoke to it. But what you've got to consider if you're doing a jackup vessel, particularly if it's one of these type which are used in the renewable sector, that it has crossovers with many other things, and the biggest crossover is going to be DP. So it's how the DP interacts in the greater scheme of things, the heavy lifting side of it. So there is quite a unique set of challenges there. Thank you for listening. Sorry for overrunning, Mike.
No, that's fine. Yeah, thank you very much. Pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Eat them wisely.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, questions. Oh, sugar.
Anybody got a question they want to raise before we move on? Okay, let's go. There's always one question.
Very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. A couple of things that do spring to mind with what you presented. In my world, the operator's world, we have assurance and we have suitability. What you presented there was, I wasn't sure what it was. It didn't really feel like it fitted with the healthcare and the management system piece. You were talking about COAs, you know, for penetration and punch through and the rest of it. We have a couple of jackups operating for me at the moment, Gorilla 7 and the rest, big ones. Surely what we should be asking is, does the management system speak to that? And then let the suitability surveys pick up on the actual location approval? Because 9 times out of 10, when we look at these or get surveyors to go out and look at these jackups on our behalf, it couldn't be 8 months prior to them coming. So what we're looking at, does the management system speak to this? So, and then they can demonstrate that. And if we've got a historic demonstration of it over a couple of years, we can take cognizance of that to say that the chances of them not doing it on my location are very slim. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Good question. What I try to do there with this is the way that some of these questions are asked within the document. A lot of the times that, certainly from experience, and I'll speak from my own experience, we're doing inspections bespoke for effectively certain projects or deliveries which are going to be done. But if you are doing them, yes, and you're 8-9 months in advance, then you will still look to see that they have the data for the present locations that they're on. So you're looking for that level of interpretation. Probably what I said wrong there, and if I did mislead anybody, I apologize for that, is that if you were doing it prior to one going on to a job, so it's probably been my misinterpretation there, but you will still need to go through to ensure that they understand what that data is for the location that they're working on or they're going to work on, because it is a part of that question. In my opinion, that's how I would interpret it.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's a wrap, as they say.
Thank you very much.
So moving swiftly.